Thank you so much, Norm, for joining us and for being willing to tell us about your new book. So take it away and tell us about the background to
Well,
start with.
thank you very much, Deidre, for first of all inviting me to make this presentation tonight. And thanks particularly to the press for guiding the book to publication. I wanted to also give a shout out to the editor, Slater Sabo, who steered me away from several literary cliffs, and also to Lee Noyes, who was a reader of a draft that I prepared and had to revise before I submitted to the press. Lee hates semicolons and reminded me that shorter sentences have greater impact. So thanks to both of those people. As I reflect on what I was trying to accomplish in the book, you know, there are many, many books on the life of Sitting Bull. This is not one of those books. This book has a perspective that is both broader and narrower than the life of Sitting Bull. Broader, I say, because it's an 1890 view of America as they looked at the Native American. And of course, it's particularly placed in terms of the Northern Plains and the Lakota. But it's that look of superiority of the white race of America and its reaction to what is still considered a savage people, and their attempt, I guess you would say, of the America people to assimilate now the people that they've taken the land from, to bring them to a white America. And yet they're confined to relocation camps, as I call reservations, and are living in a very difficult time. So that's the broader view of the book. The narrow view is the focus through the last days of Sitting Bull's life, that he becomes the epitome of how America looks at the Native American in 1890, and particularly the last half of that year of 1890. Because the book concentrates on the last 20 to 17 days of Sitting Bull's life and what is happening as the nation looks through its newspapers at this man's supposed involvement or leadership of the ghost dance movement for the Lakota in the reservations of North and South Dakota of those people. And so in that respect, it has a narrow focus, and it's attempting to be very dramatic in building to the climax of the removal of Sitting Bull from this environment, because he's a disruptor, because he's a resistor, because he is challenging the country's Indian policies as implemented through the reservation system. So the context, again, to look at the broader view, is that Sitting Bull is that critic. He will accept schooling for his children, but he will not send them to boarding schools. He will not let them be deculturalized. He wants them to be Lakota children who learn, yes, they learn English, they learn new ways to make it in this country, but they're not going to be losing their culture. They're not going to be stripped of their Indianness. He maintains his religion. He is not resistive to Christian religion in terms of discussing it with the appropriate ministers of those faiths. He'll have that discussion, but he'll keep to his own faith. Most fundamentally, he's bitterly opposed to the loss of land. He's seen that over the last decades. Part of what he was fighting for in 1876 was the right to maintain life on the unceded lands that the Treaty of Laramie, Fort Laramie, established in 1868, when the Great Sioux Reservation was created, together with unceded lands and hunting lands that to the Lakota, if I can use the phrase, as long as the grasses grow and the rivers run, was a forever obligation of the United States government not to be changed. But it was changed. It was one of the reasons that there was the Battle of the Little Bighorn, because the government ordered the Sioux living off reservation in 1875 to come to the reservation, to submit to reservation life that they had avoided since 1868, I should say. He resisted that. He called together the various bands that sat along the Little Bighorn River on that June day when Custer swept down on them. He was resisting the efforts of the three columns of military to push the Lakota from the unceded lands onto the reservation. And he resisted the assault by Custer of his people. He fled from that, knowing retaliation was coming. He went to Canada. He was in exile. But when he returned, after surrendering and moving back to the United States, he again confronted the loss of land. He confronted that in terms of addressing a commission that came to the reservation in 1883 to talk the Sioux people into selling part of their land. In that regard, he was an opponent in addressing the commission. He addressed them again in 1888 and 1889, fighting against the sale of more lands. He lost that battle. In 1888-89, the Sioux Reservation gave up 9 million acres so that settlers can have the rights to those lands, so that the states of North Dakota and South Dakota that were just becoming states of the Union could have an influx of people and have economic growth. That's part of the context of who Sitting Bull was. And in 1890, conditions on the remnants of the reservation, which are now Standing Rock, Cheyenne River, Pine Ridge, and Rosebud, those reservations are under severe stress. There had been drought conditions for 2 years. Crops on what were poor lands were not functioning, were not providing for these people. There was sickness. There were many children dying, older people dying, malnutrition. Thus, the people looked for some relief. They were not getting it from the reservation system. The reservation system, by Edict of Washington, cut back rations in 1890. What did they look to? They looked to the ghost dance movement, which is another component of the context of this story, the larger picture. The ghost dance was not a Lakota phenomenon. It came out of the West. It came out of Nevada. It was preached by Wowoka. And it spread across the Rockies, moving east. It spread to the Great Plains, and many tribes embraced the ghost dance. Only the Lakota were considered militant. They did add ghost shirts, which they said were impenetrable to bullets, as people looked at the ghost dance as somewhat menacing. That was not the first impression of the ghost dance. In the early part of 1890, in the Dakota area, it was a craze. It was a curiosity. People from Shadron, Nebraska, came to watch as spectators and saw a ritual, a constant motion of the people, men, women, children, dancing, praying. The ghost dance message, as many have explained, was really a plea for relief, a prayer, as Scott Momaday said, a desperate prayer for salvation from what suffering they had. And so with that reach, there was an edge, definitely an edge. As I said, the ghost dance shirts came to the Lakota because part of the message was, and this is what the United States heard in terms of militancy and threats, that Christ had tired of the white race. The white race had not lived up to its Christian principles, and he was coming to save now and raise up the Native American. That's what they were asking for, the return of the buffalo, the return of the ghosts. The ghosts were those that had already died. And they would come back. And what would happen in that transition? That picking up by the hand of God, showing down on the red race, the white race would be covered with 5 feet of earth. Well, those were threatening words. And thus, as the year progressed, the newspapers turned on the ghost dance. Citizens nearby were concerned of where this was going. And the newspapers are a big part of the story that I'm trying to write here in terms of giving the impression and sensationalizing what's happening, but the impression of the ghost dance to the American people, the reaction of the ghost dance to the American people. And so the book is built, each chapter is built in terms of looking at what was a particular article, be it from the Chicago Tribune, the Bismarck Daily Tribune, or other papers. The Omaha Daily Bee was very big in reporting. The St. Paul Globe was big. The St. Louis papers were big in reporting what was going on. And those papers were building the story of defiance, a potential outbreak on the reservations of the Lakota. So that's the larger story, the context in which the more particular story takes place. And with that, I should introduce you to the main characters in the book. So what you should see is the cover of the book, which is an interesting photograph. It's a Dave Barry photograph, and you will see a crucifix hanging from a chain about Sitting Bull's neck. That crucifix was given to him by a Jesuit priest in 1868, the Jesuit priest soliciting his signature and those of his band to the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. Sitting Bull refused that invitation, that solicitation to sign the treaty that Red Cloud and others signed and created the Great Sioux Reservation. He would not do so, but he did accept the gesture as a gift, and he appreciated and talked well with the priest that was soliciting him. There is a particular statement that he made that is a strong influence on why I ever followed the life of Sitting Bull and ended up writing about aspects of his life. He told the priest, Father de Schmidt, I wish all to know that I do not propose to sell any portion of my country. As Deidre told you, I'm an attorney. I practice in the field of eminent domain. I represent property owners whose lands are acquired for various public projects. And that statement just resonated with me. It's so important to me that I had it printed up, framed it, and then had an oversized photograph. In fact, this photograph of Sitting Bull, and had it colorized to hang in my office. So I look at that quote most every day. In any event, I'm not going to dwell on the cover longer. This is Sitting Bull when he was released as a prisoner of war after he had surrendered. He was not put back at Standing Rock with his people for 22 months, but was sent to Fort Randall, the very southern base of South Dakota, where he spent 22 months before he was released to go to Standing Rock. It's a very interesting picture. I'm always intrigued by the butterfly at the hat band, and have no explanation for that other than he was freed as a prisoner of war and he was going home. And so maybe it was just a symbol. I'm not certain. The next major character to the book is James McLaughlin. He's known as Major McLaughlin. He was not a military man, but that was an honorary title given to several of the Indian agents overseeing reservation life. And James McLaughlin is a powerful figure in the story and is the agent that supervised the reservation, managed the reservation of Standing Rock where Sitting Bull was placed, and did clash with Sitting Bull. The next major character is General Nelson Miles, who at this time is the head of the Department of the Missouri, stationed in Chicago, Illinois, overseeing I should have said the division of the Missouri, overseeing the departments of the Platte out of Omaha and the division of the Department of the Dakota out of St. Paul. This man is a highly ambitious officer. It is said at the time that he had presidential ambitions, but he's also at a place in United States Army history where the long Indian wars have come to a conclusion. And there's a question as to the relevance of the United States Army in the West. That drives him because of his ambitions to prove its relevance. And just as strong-willed as he is, so was McLaughlin, who came to this country from Canada as a blacksmith, married a part Santee woman, also a daughter of a merchant, made some connections through that family, and moved into government service as an Indian agent, and proved his mettle in getting promoted to Standing Rock. Standing Rock was a reservation where many of the Lakota that had fought in the Little Bighorn battle were now residing, former allies of Sitting Bull. The major did a good job in terms of managing those people. They actually respected him, most of them, the progressives. He rewarded those that followed his rules. He was strong. He was not a mere political appointment that was looking to take what he could get from agency life. He cared for the people, but he was very strong-minded, and because his wife had gone to convent school, both of them were Catholic, he grasped the principle of assimilation, that she was a refined woman, that with the proper education, Christianizing, so would the Native American assimilate. And those that resisted that, he had a hard time with. The resistor at his reservation, his agency, was Sitting Bull. They frequently clashed. This is a photograph of McLaughlin's taking the delegation from his reservation, and there were other delegations from the other reservations, to Washington, D.C. in 1888, in October 1888. And the importance of the photograph to me is that both of the protagonists, Sitting Bull right here, are in the same row. McLaughlin is right here, the third row. And the group is fairly tightly bunched, except one man seems to lean a little further away. That man is Sitting Bull. They're all in their citizen's dress, as it was called, although at least Sitting Bull is wearing moccasins, and I assume many of the delegation of Native Americans were likewise doing the same. So we see the main characters. We know there are supporting actors to the story, and I'll just introduce you to a couple of them. One is Daniel Voorhees. Another is Henry Dawes. These are two senators of the United States. And I write one chapter of the debate in December 1890 about providing arms to the citizens of South and North Dakota because of the perceived rebellion coming from the ghost dance movement and the concern of the citizens. As a lawyer, I think it's the most interesting chapter, and it comes right out of the congressional record. Daniel Voorhees was from Indiana, where I happened to go to school at one time. He's a Democrat. Henry Dawes is from Massachusetts. He's a supposed friend of the Indians. He has authored, as of this time in 1890, the Dawes Act, which was to provide for allotment of lands to the Native American, further diminishing the reservation holdings. There was just too much land, and we're going to concentrate in terms of plots of lands to individual ownerships, not the commonality of a reservation holding, to break up the tribal relations. That was the act he authored, and it was authored, I believe, in 1887. In any event, the characters in that debate are these two individuals. Dawes is Republican. And at that time, the Republicans are putting forth I'm trying to think of the name. Um, it's a act of giving greater recognition to voting rights for for Black people, and it's a voting rights act that is going to be stymied that year, is not going to get to where it wants to be. And so I think in part the debate in December over providing arms to citizens, which was never in doubt, but the debate between Voorhees and Dawes is a effort to sidetrack the other bill, and they do a good job of it. Dawes is very critical of what's happening. Voorhees is questioning, but he's not really intending to vote against the provision of arms, but he questions at every turn Daniel, or not Daniel, but Henry Dawes. And it's an interesting debate in terms of these two gentlemen and others that come to the fore. So I look at them as supporting actors to the story. There's bit players. There's Daniel Royer of Pine Ridge Reservation. Daniel Royer is an appointed Indian agent out of his element. He's a political hack that got a job as an Indian agent and intended to use that to his financial advantage. He got placed at Pine Ridge at the wrong time. He came in October of 1890, and Pine Ridge was a hotbed as opposed to Standing Rock, where Sitting Bull was, who was a hotbed of embracing the ghost dance movement, as was next door Rosebud. And so Royer had a difficult time and was always pleading for help, and is part of not part of the reason, he's the reason why troops occupied Rosebud and Pine Ridge on November 20, 1890, to suppress the ghost dance movement. So those two agents from those reservations are important players in the story, and understanding how they're really festering the public's image of the ghost dance, that it is a militant uprising in the making. And when you look at Sitting Bull and the numbers of people that followed the ghost dance at Standing Rock, you see the distinction in terms of the embrace of the ghost dance movement, that it was not that great where Sitting Bull was living. And Sitting Bull was not a high priest of the ghost dance. Sitting Bull probably politically used it. He certainly allowed it to happen. Sitting Bull at this time does not live at the heart of the agency headquarters near Fort Yates, and where McLaughlin, his agent, lives, but is 40 miles away on the Grand River. He may be 40 miles away, but there are Indian police that also live in the area and that have been watching him. So he does attach himself to the ghost dance, and that's part of his undoing, not from his perspective. His perspective perhaps is a political one, in using the ghost dance to hold his people together. The conservative element, the element that is not embracing everything about the reservation system and the direction of new life, Um, yes, they farm. They farm not that diligently. They farm poor lands. Um, but they are not progressive. They're not embracing, which was this was primarily through McLaughlin, a Catholic agency. There were other denominations located in Standing Rock, but McLaughlin's strong Catholic. There's a strong Catholic system. He has preached the new religion, that is Sitting Bull. He will discuss it, but he will not embrace it. He stays to his beliefs, as does his people. So they're the conservative element on the reservation, and he was allowed to move away from the heart of the agency along the Missouri River to the location I just told you of, but remained under surveillance and embraced, if you will, for his people's sake of giving them hope, the ghost dance religion. He was not the preacher, but he was the observer, and he certainly allowed it to take place. That is his embrace of that is one of the ingredients of the, if you will, conspiracy against him. And what I've left out so far of the story is the importance of newspaper coverage that is continually casting Sitting Bull in a negative light. He's the villain in the story. He's, in retrospect, the hero of the story. Time magazine named him, I think in 2012 or so, as one of the most influential Americans in our history. But in 1868, a French military man serving with the United States Army in the Dakotas, Philippe de Trobriand, labeled him a most dangerous and ill-disposed Indian in the Dakotas. That was the same time that he was resisting signing on to the Great Sioux Reservation. That was the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868. Of course, his reputation with the United States took the most serious hit in 1876, where he was labeled the mastermind of the Custer Massacre. And then he fled to Canada. And when the United States sent a mission to talk him to come back, General Terry, one of the generals involved in the attempt to corral the non-reservation Indians in 1876, visited diplomatically to encourage Sitting Bull and his people to come back to the United States. Sitting Bull refused to shake hands, ignored Terry. He is continually building a negative reaction to this government's perception of him. However, when he finally does come back from Canada, having surrendered because of basically famine of his people in Canada and the diplomatic efforts of the government to push him back home, in 1881, he's somewhat of a notorious celebrity in Bismarck as he is being returned to Standing Rock. Well, not returned, he is being delivered to Standing Rock by steamboat. And they stop at Bismarck, and the citizens come out to greet him. He has dinner there. So it's a strange contrast. I guess it's part of how this country looks at someone who's gained notoriety, and they both can be an enemy and something of fascination. In any event, his militancy, perceived militancy, continues to follow him because he questions life on the reservation. He is continually pressing for maintaining culture, not just being submissive to Christianizing. He reluctantly takes up farming. It's a necessity, but he is certainly not a progressive. And so he is in a difficult position continually on the reservation, although Agent McLaughlin did make an effort. He allowed him to go to the Buffalo Bill Wild West show in 1884, I believe, 1885. And Sitting Bull was well treated by Buffalo Bill in that show. He was not simply paraded as a performer. He was kept out of the skits, if you will, but was nonetheless a presence at those shows, and then tired of those shows and returned home with McLaughlin attempting in a year or two later to have him go again out on tour, and Sitting Bull refusing. So Sitting Bull is continually maintaining his militancy in a way of what? The critic questioning reservation life and policies. So I'm trying to think, Deidre, of how to bring this to a close, because you told me you wanted to quit in about 45 minutes. And there's so much to the story, although I think, as I said, and maybe this is where I should finish, is there's 15 days in December where time is really clicking on the life of Sitting Bull. It is closing down on him. But before I mention that, an important ingredient in terms of McLaughlin turning on Sitting Bull is a letter to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs in October 1890. And this ends up in the Chicago Tribune. And I wanted to focus on the newspaper coverage, which I have not given sufficient attention to here. But this letter is extensively quoted in the Chicago Tribune and picked up by other newspapers on October 28th. It's written on October 17, and apparently it was leaked to the press from Washington, D.C. McLaughlin writes, he does not wish to be understood as considering the present state of excitement so alarming on the reservation as to apprehend any immediate uprising or serious outcome. McLaughlin has a firm hand on his reservation in maintaining discipline. And as I said, for most of the Sioux people living at Standing Rock, he is a good agent. He goes on to say that he doesn't expect any serious problems, but I do feel it my duty to report the present craze, he's calling it a craze, not a rebellion, and the nature of excitement existing among the Sitting Bull faction of Indians over the expected Indian millennium and annihilation of the white man and supremacy of the Indian. He calls Sitting Bull the high priest and leading apostle of this latest Indian absurdity, the chief mischief maker. He's a man of low cunning, devoid of a single manly principle in nature or an honorable trait of character, but on the contrary, is capable of instigating and inciting others to do any amount of mischief. He is a coward and lacks moral courage. He will never lead where there is danger, but is an adept in influencing his ignorant henchmen and followers, and there's no knowing what he may direct them to attempt. He's opposed everything of an elevating nature and is the most vain, pompous, and untruthful Indian that I ever knew. His word is not to be believed. He's a polygamist, a libertine, a habitual liar, an active obstructionist, and a great obstacle in civilization of these people. And he is so totally devoid of any nobler traits of character and is so wedded to the old Indian ways and superstitions that it is very doubtful if any change for the better will ever come over him at his present age of 56 years. He was wrong by a couple of years. Sitting Bull was 59 at that time. And he concludes after this diatribe, that is, McLaughlin concludes, desiring to exhaust all reasonable means before resorting to extremes, I have sent a message to Sitting Bull that I want to see him at the agency, and I feel quite confident that I shall succeed in allaying the present excitement and put a stop to the absurd craze for the present at least. But I would respectfully recommend the removal from the reservation and confinement in some military prison some distance from Sioux country. McLaughlin is exhausted at this point with Sitting Bull. He sees him as a threat, not militarily a threat, not a threat in terms of an armed uprising, but a threat to the good management of the reservation, the assimilation of the Native American. And perhaps I should quit there if there's appropriate. Deidre, you give me the signal, I can continue talking, whatever you like.
I think it would be great for you to show those slides you have of the newspapers. And then that'll still give us a few minutes for questions.
Okay. So from the slides we looked at, it's this, what's happening here? Not clicking down. Oh, there we go. The newspaper accounts, as I said, are critical to what I wrote. It's the perception of Sitting Bull to the American public. And they're sensationalized. This is a time where newspapers in America are in a great ascendancy. The illiteracy rate of people are declining. People are reading. They're schooled, and newspapers are growing. When Sitting Bull was released in 1881, surrendered and came to Fort Burford and then was sent to Standing Rock. As I said, he stopped. He didn't stop. The steamships stopped and let him off, and he became a curious item. Is invited to the hotel in Bismarck, the Merchant Hotel, where he has, among other things, ice cream for the first time in his life, and is really well received. The noted chieftain of the Custer Massacre fame arrives in Bismarck. But what's interesting in the story, as I said, he's continually looked on as the villain. The story goes on to talk about his reaction to a Frank Leslie weekly magazine illustrated cartoon showing Sitting Bull, a large bull, sitting and having a ring in his nose, and the chain to Uncle Sam with people feeding beans to this Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull, the person, was greatly inflamed at such a characterization, and it just confirmed his mistrust of the United States. The other couple of newspapers I wanted you to see are at the time of his death. His death occurs in December 15, 1890, killed by the Indian police. And the New York Times picks it up, the last of Sitting Bull. The Chicago Daily Tribune has a multi-column coverage on the front page of Sitting Bull and his life and the reaction to it. Obviously, the killings. These articles are within a day of the killing of Sitting Bull. And so they don't quite have the story down on how this all happened. It's a scattered reporting and again, the sensationalized reporting. The New York World carries the story. The story reaches London, the Pall Mall Gazette. All of these papers are focusing on the death of Sitting Bull. Such was the notoriety of his life and death. So there you are. I'm happy to respond to any questions. Those are the highlights, or some of the highlights, of the Phantom Storm. It wasn't a real storm at all.
Norm, thank you so much for that. Wow, so much information. And it's all in your head. That's so wonderful.
Or
So
on scattered notes.
if you all have questions, please write them in the chat and I will convey them. And we have a comment, just the connection between the town of DeSmet in South Dakota being named for Father DeSmet. So Scott Myers says, it was fun to hear. Sitting Bull had a friend in Father DeSmet. As he's from Scott and is from DeSmet. So that connection.
Okay.
Really neat. So while we're seeing it, if questions come out, was it that quote from Sitting Bull that you have on your office wall that inspired you to dig more deeply into Sitting Bull's story with your previous book and then this book?
The answer is yes, in a word. That quote I first saw in Robert Utley's book, The Lance and the Shield, which is one of the first books that I read about Sitting Bull a number of years ago. And I was fascinated by the whole story. And he's a great author on the life of Sitting Bull. But when I read that quote and put it together with the legal type of work I do, I could not but continually let that revolve in my mind. And as I said, it ends up being sort of a motto to me in the practice of law.
That's neat. Okay, so what was the most surprising thing in your research? Because you already had a sense of where this was going, right? We know how the story ends. But as you're getting there, what was most surprising?
I think the surprising aspect of it is the intensity of animosity towards Sitting Bull when, yes, he's a dissident. He's not a militant dissident. He's nearly 60 years old at this time. He's a minority on Standing Rock Reservation. Yet there is, by his history and the vilification of him over the years, there's still fear of him to the extent that he's not the principal ghost dance not even one of the principal ghost dance leaders on the various reservations that made up the former Great Sioux Reservation. He's an enabler, but not a preacher. He, I believe, never participated in the dance. He watched the dance at Standing Rock, or at Grand River at Standing Rock. There's others that promoted the dance, not him. And one time he's asked about it, and he said it's not the most important thing. The children are the most important thing. Just like Red Cloud, they understood that it had importance to their people, but they did not totally embrace it. They were not the proponents. So I don't know. That's my best answer for the moment.
That's a great answer. We do have a follow-up about Father de Smet. Could you speak more about that, the friendship, as you called it, or interchanges, maybe exchanges between Sitting Bull and Father de Smet?
Right. Well, Sitting Bull participated in Red Cloud's war over the Powder River, the shortcut of the Bozeman Trail going to the mining fields in Montana through prime hunting grounds and lands of the Lakota. But it was Red Cloud that was the champion of that war effort that ended up with the Treaty of 1868 at Fort Laramie. Sitting Bull participated further out, up in the upper areas of the Dakotas at the time. And I don't know of any particular great battles that he participated in, but nonetheless, when Red Cloud, and Red Cloud incidentally was one of the last to sign, he maintained his distance as the treaty was being worked out and various sub-chiefs were signing. He waited and waited, probably for concessions, and then signed. And de Smet went north to find Sitting Bull, to get Sitting Bull to sign, because as I told you, de Tobran wrote about the negativity of Sitting Bull at the same time in 1868. And had no problem visiting the camp. There were others around Sitting Bull that were concerned with the Padre coming in, but Sitting Bull welcomed him. He brought him into his own camp within the larger camp and spent days talking to him, but maintained his position. And the result was a cordial conversation, which didn't result in the desired end for de Smet trying to get a signature on the Fort Laramie Treaty. And one of the elements of pride in Sitting Bull's life is he never signed any treaty. He was at the original Fort Laramie Treaty in 1851 with older chiefs. I think he was around 20, 21 years of age at that time, sitting in the back row, probably not asked to sign, but he didn't sign. And he didn't sign in 1868. He certainly didn't sign in 1876 when the Black Hills were peeled out of the Great Sioux Reservation after the Battle of Little Bighorn. So he never signed a treaty.
All right. I think that it is about time to wrap this up. So a few closing details. So thanks again to Norm Mattioni, and the book is A Phantom Storm, Sitting Bull, America and the Ghost Dance.